Hello everyone, welcome back. It's Visiting the Village episode 50, and it's a special episode simply by virtue of the fact that it actually exists. As you know, we've taken a long hiatus from Visiting the Village as we've been making games and doing various other things. So now we're back, and with me, as always, is the inevitable Ian Hardingham, looking resplendent there in front of his sexy mattress.
Hello, now you can see me on News Channel 8. I am Ian Hardingham in audio and in video. We're back!
It's terrible. So our top story this week is Rezzed. We're going to talk a lot about Rezzed, the PC and indie game show from Eurogamer, which was held in Brighton just this week, and we were both down there, as were a lot of other indie developers and a lot of other nice people. So I want to just kind of kick this off by asking you, what was your general impression of Rezzed, and do you think it was a good move for them to have held it in the way that they did?
Yeah, I was really excited about Rezzed when they announced it. You always want Rock Paper Shotgun to be able to have sort of the power, obviously, along with Eurogamer, to actually organise an event like this.
Yeah.
So, it sort of really harkens back to going to PAX for me. When we were at PAX last year, PC Gamer had this big kind of PC keynote thing. We get to see Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo having these massive events that cost millions and millions and look completely ridiculous every E3. And the PC has nothing because the PC doesn't really have a platform holder, even though, both Microsoft and Valve are really platform holders. So we haven't really been represented well in the past, and it's just really insane after Call's PC's death 2 years ago that now Eurogamer and Shotgun can organise basically a PC gaming festival. I thought it was great. I thought holding it before Develop was a really, really great idea. I think it kind of raised the floor of how bad it could be. You could imagine maybe being a problem and not many people coming, but because it was Develop, a lot of people came just because they were going to Develop anyway. So it kind of piggybacked on Develop, which I think was a great thing to do. That's my first thought, really.
Yeah, well, I felt it had this kind of reclaiming the territory from the mainstream industry, because all of those venues, like the places that we were out sort of drinking afterwards, they're kind of haunts of, the UK mainstream stalwart industry, like the old guys. And for some reason, whether this is fair or not, the company I always think about in that is Codemasters, just probably because they're local to me, like this long-running established company, they bring all their guys down for Develop and they have a good time, whatever. But this was kind of this is where the indies get to be the main attraction, and you go straight through the door in Rezzed, and on your left immediately is a huge area for Strike Suit Zero, kind of a big budget indie game, and that's kind of exactly that choice of having that there was absolutely fantastic. However that situation came about, it was great, because it's this is a flagship kind of high budget, high tech, interesting but very indie title. And it was just cool. The atmosphere of that was great. I think it was called the Left Field Indie area, which was this giant kind of white corridor where people could write on the walls, and it just had loads and loads of stations organised for various indie games. Was probably the highlight, actually. I think most people said that just walking down there and taking in some of the weirder games was the absolute highlight. So it was awesome to see stuff like that as well.
Yeah, it was really funny to see sort of... pretty much 50% of the floor was indie games, and 50% of the floor was Far Cry 3.
Yeah.
And it's amazing to have literally half the space taken up with that stuff. I was a bit worried by how empty it was at times. I think it could have done with being sort of twice as full. So hopefully next year, people will have word of mouth and it'll get there. Highlight for me and you as well, I know, was Hotline Miami.
Yes,
which is absolutely incredible, and people must play it as soon as possible.
We have to talk about this game because it's by Cactus, who of course is famous for doing these kind of smaller, weirder. I hesitate to use the term, but perhaps art games could be levelled at his output.
Don't tell him you said that.
No, I won't. Definitely not. But smaller things, and this game really looks like. I mean, to describe it, it's basically a 2D top-down shooter where aiming is controlled with the mouse and WSAD moves the character. But it's insta-death, so basically any attack will kill you. So you have to plan out your route effectively through the levels. You die a lot, you replay a lot, so it has a kind of spelunky, roguelike-esque thing to it. There's definitely a slightly roguelike element of discovery with the weapons. Would you say that's kind of fair, or am I...
I think that the genre it's most like is kind of Trials. I think it's like those racing games where you restart after about 3 or 4 seconds each time, and it's about perfecting your route, discovering and perfecting your reactions to it.
The thing I really liked about it is that while it has that quality, it also has this really nice chaotic thing, because you can right click to throw your weapon, whether it's a gun or just something you happen to come across. You can just lob your weapon at someone, it can bounce off them, and you can have this brilliant sort of meticulously planned out route, and then if you do something slightly different, you can just end up in like insano territory. If you knock a guy down, you have to press space to get on top of them and then pummel them to death, and that can just lead to... So it has this really nice like, luck-based and slightly random elements on top of that, which means that you're excited to replay each time. It's not as rigid as a Trials or even like a Meat Boy is another kind of comparison. It sort of has...
Definitely. It's got a bit more freedom in those games, being top-down. Like you feel like you've got a bit more creativity. It's not a set path, you know.
Yeah.
And I think in the full game, it will be interesting to see how they sort of change each of the levels as you go along. Like, are you going to be able to keep that fresh?
Yeah.
Because it's quite pared down mechanics. But I thought the rendering was fantastic, and like you, I sort of really associate Cactus with being someone who makes these sort of very little kind of sort of screw you games.
Yeah.
And this has got like a sort of a small publisher, and it looks like it's really coming together. So I'm super excited for his first like sort of proper release. This is great. I can now use air quotes, and people can actually see air quotes.
It's kind of
very excited about that.
It's kind of a big screw you game, I think. Like he's taken that mentality and he's now extended it out into something that is. He's working with a visual artist on this, as a separate visual artist who is quite well known, it just delivers this kind of exciting package. And there is always a big queue for that game. It's what we like to call a great show game. It was an awesome show game. It's very accessible. Just watching someone else play it was just like enough to make anyone excited about it. So Hotline Miami, we love that. I also loved Barry Ball, which I played with Jumer. And it's basically a sort of it's a 2D platform sort of dueling sports game. So you have a little character with a jetpack, a ball appears, and you have to basically grab the ball and shoot it over to your opponent's side, so that it has to fall off the platform and end up in the water on their side of the court. And that, as a competitive game, that was just amazing. Like it really, really has that nice, like, it felt like Nintendo World Cup. That's what that felt like to me, like a kind of jetpacky Nintendo World Cup. Where you can also kind of attack your opponent and like push them off. It's a really, really great game. I hope they kind of flesh it out a bit, and yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, I was watching you and Jimmy playing. It looked great fun. It looked like a cross between sort of Smash Brothers, you know, like a lo-fi Smash Brothers with a ball, which sounds pretty good to me. Yeah, these kind of lo-fi dueling games often work the best at these shows. And it's interesting, like when you look at really what is a good show game, versus what is a good like indie game in general. Like it's interesting, and Pineapple Smash Crew is another game which I played, and when it eventually came out I was pretty disappointed by, but was a massive show hit at Eurogamer last year. Obviously you're not looking for depth at these things, you're looking for something which looks immediately attractive and is fun to watch, almost. Yeah,
that's the context in which it works best. Of course, the other game in that genre is Nidhogg, which everyone just wants to come out. I mean, this even kind of looks a little tiny bit like Nidhogg graphically, so I'm interested in that. I don't know kind of where the like long-term life is for those games. Do you think that people should be kind of fleshing them out more than they do, or do you just think that we should, this is a genre now and like it needs to have its own channel?
Yeah, I think that's probably right, actually. I mean, they're so arcadey, and we want new arcade games. Like, that's actually something that we're really missing at the moment.
Yeah.
So I think I'd go with just like release the stupid thing.
Yeah. Someone standing behind me, it may even have been our friend Rich. He said, "Do you think there's any mileage in like an online game that you pay 50p to play, like an arcade game?" And I don't think so, but I think if there is, then Barra Ball and Hotline Miami
that kind of game
would work in that context. But
yeah, I think Microsoft tried that with some of their online arcade games, and people reacted badly.
It doesn't seem to make sense. In terms of AAA, you mentioned Far Cry. We had a go with that. We were surprised by boobs, as I think a lot of people were. Tribal boobs. Yeah. So the game opens.
It basically starts out with you having sex with someone.
Yeah.
In a way that I think it's fair to call gratuitous.
I think that's probably a fair and accurate use of the word gratuitous, because it has absolutely no context whatsoever, and it's clearly just in there for like. I mean, the term attract mode is like in a show context. It was absolutely ridiculous. But that's not to say that Far Cry has ever been anything other than ridiculous. I mean, we're both replaying Far Cry 1 at the moment, but you played Far Cry 2 quite a bit, and that seemed to have, it was like they attempted to inject some gravitas into Far Cry, and that was like the wrong serum.
Yeah. Far Cry 1 is sort of one of my all-time favourite games. I just think it's a fabulous FPS, and it's probably my favourite FPS, really. Far Cry 2, I think it was divisive and was very well received at the time. I think a lot of people now, there's a bit of a backlash to it. But I really didn't like the gunplay, basically. Like, I think that what Far Cry 1 did fantastically was just the mechanics of the guns, reloading, shooting, all those different things. Just really, really, really great.
Yeah.
Far Cry 2 You didn't have like a good headshot system. The combat ended up being very samey and sort of really quite sort of labored. And I think I really want to blame the consoles for that, really, because as soon as you take away the accurate shooting of a mouse and you put it on the control pad, it really changes how it's best to have like mechanics. So I was really annoyed about that, and I'm sure you're gonna have the same problems with Far Cry 3. But Far Cry 3 does look like sort of a cross between the two, so I'm kind of vaguely excited about it. But again,
Yeah.
like as soon as you get a console FPS, I just think it kind of loses a lot of its sheen for me.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I didn't really. I picked up some Far Cry-esque vibes from it, but it didn't seem to kind of. I mean, just the idea of a bow and arrow. I don't think that's Far Cry. Like, that's not Far Cry to me. Like, that's like the last thing I want.
Jack Carver would not have.
He would not have a bow and arrow. He's not the kind of. He is not in green leggings, shinning his way through Sherwood Forest. You know, spotting the King's men at a distance.
I actually think bow and arrows are like the most consistently like crap weapon.
Yeah.
I mean, when Half-Life 1 brought it out, I was like, oh wait, maybe this isn't a classic anymore. And people say it's really great. It's like, no, I'll have a railgun. I'm really not into the bow and arrow thing.
I don't remember the bow and arrow in Half-Life 1. That's not.
I think it was the only weapon that was good against the big fish.
Oh,
okay. The Icothalach, and I think that's the deal with bow and arrow. It's pretty good against fish.
It's just never good. Rez, is there anything else you wanted to say about Rez, or shall we move on? I realised that the
touch on the hugely relevant Quake 2 tournament.
Yes, the Quake 2 tournament. So they picked, of all the competitive games they could possibly choose to pick, they picked Quake 2. So you just had this experience of walking around a show floor and then looking at all the signs for the games. You're like, there's Far Cry, there's Colonial Marines, Quake 2. And it just kind of the incongruity of that, but that did sum something up about PC gaming to me. Like, PC gamers are people who are not afraid to dig out an ancient competitive game and have a LAN party with it. So it was kind of cool in its own right. I did watch a bit of
the organisers told us that the whole deal was that the RPS guys had said we want a LAN game there.
Yeah.
Again, so fair enough. I suppose Quake 2 is a LAN game. I would have liked to see like GTA 1 or
GTA
Forsaken
1.
was my real call.
Forsaken, we had a debate about whether that had motorbikes in it, and it was eventually concluded that it did in fact have motorbikes, even though they were fantastical motorbikes. So yeah, Rez, it's awesome, and yeah, we do recommend going and checking it out if you are a PC or indie game fan and you're in the UK. It was pretty awesome. So now it's time for me to bring back podcast staple, the bell, and this is the first time that everyone has actually seen the bell on video format, so I'm now going to press the bell, and it's my way of controlling the flow of the conversation and exerting my editorial dominance. So here we go. That's the end of Rez. Right, now we're going to move on. We're going to talk about the recent EU ruling associated with the reselling of digital products. Now, this was reported on RPS, and I suggest you go and have a look at John Walker's piece on there if you want a bit more detail on this, but this has been around the internet for quite a while. Basically, there was a ruling in a case which implies that it will be forced upon us to allow the resale of purchased games. So if you buy a game and you want to sell it on second hand, you have to delete it from your hard drive, but you can do that, and developers and publishers and distributors don't get a cut of that because it's your game and you own it, you sell it on. And what I want to talk about with this is not so much kind of the actual practical reality of what's going to happen, but if we take it as read that that was the case, you had to do that, or you had to allow that, do we think that that's going to be an entirely good or bad thing for customers and developers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really difficult. That's obviously the question.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are going on the side where they're worried that sort of Steam sales aren't going to work, that really sort of cheap sales of new games will be really undermined by this sort of weird proto-digital secondhand market. I mean, I think the first thing is, I think secondhand, and I know this really isn't the question that you're asking, but I'm going to go ahead anyway. I think like secondhand makes a lot less obvious sense when it's a digital thing. I think when you've got a DVD or a CD in a box, like it makes sense that you should be able to resell that. That makes sense to me, and I think it's stupid. The publishers have been trying to limit that. It's a physical thing. I want to be able to sell it on. When it's a digital thing, I mean, we all know what having Steam is like. I don't know what selling my thing on Steam is. It sort of disappears from my account. It appears in someone else's account. Especially if I buy something from one of the other places that doesn't have that client where I actually download something.
Yeah.
What are the mechanics behind selling this on? So I just want to start off by saying that I think this is sort of I'm not totally convinced this is actually feasible. If it becomes feasible, I think there are two things that can happen. The first and most likely is that absolutely nothing's going to happen. That a few people, a small percentage of people, are going to be really, really into it, and there'll be some niche sites for it, and it'll be great for them, and it really won't affect anyone very much. I think that if it was sort of massively reinforced law, and you had a site that was as big as eBay, that sort of by law forced Valve to allow them to access their databases, so I could, like, with a click of a button, sell a game on Steam, and it really just happens automatically. I could see a situation where it actually really badly affects the new game market. So
Yeah.
I just don't know what's going to happen.
I feel like if this was, as you say, a very literal law and it was implemented, I think it would propagate quickly. Like, I think because of, the network nature of gamers and the way that they treat things, I think systems and, automated systems would arrive really quickly to allow you to find, the best price for a game, or look at games you haven't played for a while and tell you how much they're worth and encourage you to sell them. I think that would propagate like super fast. So to me, it's kind of a given that you'd have an almost optimal system for, knowing what the best value was for the thing you wanted to get. And I think that would impact new game sales, pretty significantly. And I don't necessarily think that this is kind of the right way to look at those rights as well as a customer, because it's implied to me, at least, even, irrespective of my job, that when I'm paying for a game online, I'm buying access to a thing. I'm not buying that thing to own it and be able to do all these things with it that I want to do. I'm buying the right to be able to use it.
Yeah, and I think that what people have been really sort of gearing around with this thing is that one of the loopholes, if we can call it a loophole in this ruling, is that if it's an unlimited license forever, then you should be able to sell it on.
Yeah.
But if it's a license for a period of time, like 5 years, 1 year, 20 years, then this ruling does not apply. And I think that's really underlined to gamers what they really care about. Sure, they care a bit about resale. They really care about owning games for life. Like,
Sure.
they want to see EA getting past this by giving you a 1 year license. And I think that's a really interesting part of it. It's far more important, certainly to me and a lot of people that I know, that we keep the games forever that we have bought, that I can always go back and play Far Cry 20 years later. Even after I'm dead, somehow that's important to me. So I think one of the most interesting things that's come out of this is I think it's sort of dulled the edge of the super second-hand fundamentalists.
Yeah.
Like the people who just have an unbelievably hardline approach, just say, second-hand, we must have this right. They've actually looked at this and what it could mean and started to maybe see some of the other points of view. So in that way, I think it's sort of mildly positive.
Yeah. And there is the flip side of this, of course, which for things where I think this kind of applies for games that you're not really that interested in, but you'd like to buy anyway. It would be nice that there was a sort of guaranteed cheaper way of getting them. I mean, like exactly the way that you treat used games, used physical games. You go like, oh, this is cheap, I'll just see what this is like. And I think we have Steam sales and Humble Bundles for that now. But maybe there need to be more mechanisms to allow that, with better discovery of older, cheaper games, because the way that digital distribution works now is that it's very geared around new stuff, and it always has been, and I don't think that necessarily has to be the case. I've always kind of fantasized about a really good site that finds, that has a really good recommendation engine that knows like a lot about the games I play and knows stuff that I might be interested in from like the late 90s to the mid 2000s, because recommendation engines on distribution sites I don't think are that great right now. I think they're quite crude. They don't work that well.
There's something to that, but I also think that the problem that Steam sales are solving to a certain extent is the problem of choice. Like, it's this sort of on-demand versus having a sort of a channel that's feeding you things problem. So I think a lot of people, they don't subscribe to GameTap. Because the problem with GameTap is you still don't know what to play. Like, you're still a bit tired. Like, you kind of want to be told what to play. Something that you're, like you say, that's recommended to you, that you're likely to like, but not is just sort of one drip in an ocean. And I think that's one of the things that Steam sales do, is they kind of get everyone to play the same thing. And that's kind of, because it's the only choice I have. Like, I want to buy a new game, I want to buy it cheaply. This is the only new game I can buy cheaply. I think that's actually like, there's a club aspect to it, like a book club aspect.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't know if I mean, and I'm very different to a lot of people who are playing games, sure, but I don't know if that's what I want. Like, I don't necessarily... A good recommendation engine obviously doesn't have to be connected to this second-hand thing.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that could work on its own.
Irrespective of that, sure. Yeah, it does fascinate me though. I mean, I think just how hard it is to, if I want to find, like a not that dated but still interesting FPS. Like that's quite a difficult set of criteria to search for.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you can filter by date and Metacritic and stuff, but it just seems like, because when you go into a shop, I read this thing recently that said the most effective retail shops are ones where all the goods are all piled up together, so it feels like there's a lot of stuff
Right.
there. So like counter to the whole Apple methodology, interestingly. But
Yeah.
so there's nothing really that is digitally like that. I mean, GOG definitely does a lot of that stuff. They have a lot of you can see people's game collections and stuff, and that's pretty cool. But I feel like when I go to a lot of digital retailers, I'm seeing like this really nicely presented set of new things, and I'm not going through the pile like finding random old stuff that looks cool. I'm not having that kind of cool
Right.
shopping experience that I used to have in like Computer Run.
Yeah.
Like everyone has their local game store. They go there and there's like some weird bargain bin or whatever. That doesn't exist, and I think that needs to come back because I think that's attractive for a customer.
Bring back the bargain
Bring
bin.
back the bargain bin. Well, that's what Savvy Gamer is for. There we go.
That's right.
That's a plug for Louis. I want to talk to you about Spelunky.
Okay,
Now,
let's talk about Spelunky.
Spelunky is perhaps one of your favourite games of all time, is that fair?
Yeah, one of my top 3 games of all time.
And certainly, I just think probably, I mean, easily a contestant for best indie game ever in my eyes,
Absolutely.
and I don't say that lightly. It's fantastic design. It's got, rightfully fantastic reviews, fantastic awards, and so on, and lots of kudos to Derek for having created this wonderful thing. Now, its XBLA version just came out. Lots of rave reviews, bringing Spelunky to the wider audience. What do we think about this? You've played it a little bit. I've played it for 10 minutes while I was waiting for you to have a shower. Let's talk about
Yeah,
Spelunky.
I played it for a few hours, and I come to this subject with a heavy heart. So I have to reiterate that I just love Spelunky. I think it's one of the most forward-thinking designs of all time, and I think it's going to change game design,
Yeah.
especially for platformers, for a long time.
Yeah.
And I find Spelunky XBLA a little bit underwhelming. I'm sort of a bit disappointed. I really preferred the old art style, and I've really tried to give it a chance. Like, I'm trying not to be an old curmudgeon. I'm really, really trying to sort of come to terms with it, and I just don't really like the new art style. The controls and everything are okay. I've been using an Xbox pad to play Spelunky on the PC forever, so it wasn't too hard getting used to. But there are a couple of really big mechanical changes that I'm not sort of too sure about. The whip has been made a little bit slower.
Yeah.
The run has been made significantly more powerful, and the level timer, which is in the form of a ghost, has been made much shorter, which is probably the thing that I dislike least beyond just aesthetic stuff. And I was turned off by the music. So it's just an amazing game. It's still an amazing game, and that's why it's getting 10s out of everywhere, and it's much better.
Yeah.
That so many more people get to access it. I just, as a fan, was a bit disappointed.
Yeah. Do you think that any of those choices were about making the game more accessible? Because I think the art style is certainly what's clearly been the motivation is to take this away from sort of a humble pixely origin and turn it into something kind of quite slick and cartoony. Like, it's definitely got a cartoony vibe to it. And I also personally didn't feel that was 100% successful. I think there were some nice things about it. Having seen screenshots and what the actual game looks like, I think that there are some... I understand the decision, is what I'm trying to say. I just don't think the execution was there. Do you think that it's kind of a fault of it trying to become more popular, is what I'm saying?
Well, I read some interviews during development, and one of the things that Microsoft sort of said to Derek, they said, basically, you played the game, they loved the game, and they kind of found all the points at which it was possible to have something frustrating happen to you just because of the controls.
Yeah.
So a really good example of that is in shops, where it's actually easy to accidentally attack the shopkeeper rather than buy a product. So they fixed that, and that's great. Another one that they fixed, which is a really great fix, is that it used to be really easy to enter the end of level gate accidentally, which would be really, really annoying. So they fixed that. That stuff's all great. Running was really quite irritating, quite difficult to activate. Took a little bit of time to learn. I spent a lot of my first 20 hours of the game not really even knowing you could run. So I can really understand why they tried to address it, but they've made it into a far too powerful thing. You can start running halfway through a jump, which is kind of almost feels like Super Meat Boy style. Like, it sort of makes it into less of a... There's a real feel of not being in with the physics of the game with that. So that kind of stuff, so I think there's a lot of accessibility about it. I have no idea why they've done the thing with the ghost. I can't understand why that would be an accessibility issue. I mean, yeah, and again, super sort of naive, like cartoony graphics. Fair enough, but it seems like a slightly odd choice because what they
Mm.
want to sell to is the hardcore Xbox platformer. They're not selling this to your mum. They're selling it to the teenagers who only play on the Xbox and do not play on the PC. So
Yeah.
I don't understand really why they would go in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, I think I haven't seen a sort of wider reaction to the art style, so it may just be us and our grumpy
May just be
ways.
us.
Yeah, it may just be us. That's going to become the show's motto, I think.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was. I wouldn't say that it was sort of a huge disappointment to me. I mean, I think initially when I played it, I just had that thing of like, oh, this is so different. I don't like this. And now kind of I come back to it like it may be something that I purchased. It may be something that I engage with again in a different way. Because Spelunky is one of those games. Even though I appreciate it massively, I always sort of slightly bounced off the surface because it's very skill-based platform, which is not exactly my thing, but it certainly
Right.
seems like maybe the Xbox is the right place to get into it more because it's more relaxed setting, etc. So it may be something that I give a go to.
Yeah, definitely. And just to be clear, that he's added a lot of content, like a lot more
Yeah,
content than maybe he'd have to. And it's a fantastic place to have the game. I just had to get that off my chest, Paul. I had to get it off my chest.
I think that's very important to do. So now we're going to talk about Persona 4 and region locking. So Atlas explains that Persona 4 Arena's region lock is something to do with currency differences. And it's fairly unprecedented, I believe, and they've said that it will not lead to a slippery slope. And we would like to thank Joystick for bringing this to our attention. So what are your thoughts on this, and what's going on here exactly?
So, PlayStation 3 is great because it doesn't have any region locking. So, even I, who am not a particularly hardcore console gamer, have imported games on the PlayStation 3 and been very, very happy that I've been able to do that. Madden Head Coach 2009,
Yeah,
I was very excited to play.
naturally.
And it's always made me really, really upset, region locking, mainly because I want to buy games that aren't available in my territory. Like, I'm not super hardcore with wanting to get a game as soon as it comes out often, and I certainly don't want the Japanese experience to feel like I've probably played the game. But there are lots of games which just don't come out in Europe, and I want to have the option of playing those. And if I go to America, I want to be able to buy a game. So
Yeah.
I was like so into Sony's approach, really, really happy. Sony, yes, really good. So this thing's come out and everyone's been really upset. Like this is one of the only region locked games,
Yeah.
and it's a really unusual situation. And they've come out and said this. It's really specifically to do with the weak yen, that it would be incredibly much cheaper, like half as expensive, to import the game from Japan for American players.
Yeah.
I think it's an overreaction. I don't know how many American players, what percentage of their user base are going to do this. What do you think?
Yeah, it does seem like an overreaction. I mean, I think that non-region locking is like one of the great achievements of the new digital era. Like, it's starting to accept that everywhere, should have parity. And I mean, it's kind of a slightly related topic. Regional price differences is something that's a bit kind of difficult for some people, and there are definite arguments for and against that. Even the very militant anti-regional price difference people will concede some points there, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, it just seems like if you really want to be able to do that, then you should probably be some way of doing it. If you can buy from a legitimate seller and they get revenue and everything, then they should probably let people do that. Because
I'm
it
just
is
surprised they
effort.
thought it was a big enough deal. Maybe
yeah.
they're seeing other games being imported like on mass levels. But
That
again,
might be true.
I
That
just
might be true.
find it really difficult to believe that all these American PlayStation 3 guys are hooked up to,
Yeah.
I don't know, whatever the replacement for Lixang is nowadays,
Yes.
and just like ordering en masse. I just don't see it, but maybe it's a big deal.
It's kind of related to what we were talking about earlier with the reselling thing. Like, there's always going to be these moves, a sort of pro-consumer, anti-publisher rights moves, and then the other side fights back and whatever. And I just don't know, I don't know where the end of that is, but I don't think the end of it is bringing back region locking, which was something, largely absent from the industry for a long time.
Yes, please, no more region
No
locking.
more region locking. We move on. Voice acting in RPGs. It may be more trouble than it's worth. Now, as my phone interrupts us rudely, what do we think about voice acting in RPGs? I personally have a lot of issues with most voice acting in most games. I think it's incredibly difficult to get it right. I think it more often than not, actually undermines the game very seriously. I think there are a lot of games that you could take... you could suspend your disbelief more if you weren't listening to a sadly underpaid voice actor overemphasizing every other syllable. So what is your take on more trouble than it's worth for voice acting?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, the core of this article, again from Joystick, is that the problem with voice acting in these big games is that it really locks the script really early on because you have to go into voice acting production about, I mean, a good 9 months, often more, before the game is actually released. So it really undermines your ability to sort of mess around with the script later on. And I think that's almost reason enough on its own to not have it apart from certain situations in an RPG. An RPG is not like it's not linear like a first-person shooter or an adventure game or
Yeah.
something else where you can lock those things relatively early, and the dialogue really doesn't affect the game anywhere near as much as it does in an RPG. Looking at Knights of the Old Republic 2, famously sort of released in a sort of a slightly balked state, with the ending making absolutely no sense whatsoever because they had to cut a lot of content and they could not get voiceover redone. I think there are genres where it's really good. I think in adventure games, when LucasArts started doing the talkie versions of
Yeah.
stuff like Day of the Tentacle and so on, like that was a massive deal for me as a kid. Like I really wanted that version.
Yeah. Yeah.
But RPGs, I'm with you. I've always posited this thing that I would really like in RPGs, where everyone's speaking this made up foreign language. So you have the sound of someone's voice and you have the translation beneath it. So
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like sort of you can hear all of the foley in the world. You can hear the birds chirping, but you can't hear this person talking. But there's none of this voiceover problem. That's sort of the solution that I want.
Yeah, I think there's some problems with that in that it's very hard to make that not stupid. So I mean, The Sims is kind of the obvious, like the go-to
Yeah.
thing that has done that, and I think that I mean, in the context of The Sims, it works, but again, coming up with a language that doesn't sound completely bananas when there's someone who comes up to you and goes blah, 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 and then the translation, like it just that's what I'm imagining. Like they do real words so badly that
You
made up
can
words.
use a real life language, a sort of a very little known real life language, and I think that would make a bad voice actor sound okay. Yeah, that's what I think.
A very little known.
Peruvian.
What happens when Peruvian people buy the game and everyone's
Look,
walking around?
I'm sorry, Peruvian market, but I'm really happy for you to have bad voice acting. Take one for the team, Peru.
I I find that an intriguing concept. I'm not sure that's the solution. I
So
mean,
we're smaller than Peru then.
there are languages which
Well,
fewer people
well.
speak than Spanish. So
How about Welsh? Very few people speak Welsh.
I would like, to be honest, a fantasy RPG where everyone speaks Welsh
I think we could all get behind that.
would be fantastic.
Sorry, Peru.
Sorry, Peru. I'm assuming that it's Spanish. It may not be. This is. We move on applicably to guilt in games. Richard Cobbett has pulled out his emotional chops once more, and he's here to discuss decisions which make you feel guilty in games. The jumping off point from this, I believe, is Spec Ops: The Line, which, from what I read in a very intriguing Edge review last week, basically is about your character starting off as a kind of stereotypical bro video game hero, and everything degenerating into a kind of enormously morally confused mess, but on a kind of unprecedented level from the way that's ever happened before. So decisions that make you feel guilty in games and the nature of guilt in games. Have you ever felt guilty in a game?
Oh, I'm prepared for that question. I'm going to have to think about it. So the key of this article really is saying that when you don't really have a choice in a game, which often happens, including the infamous airport scene in Modern Warfare 2,
No
when you don't
Russian.
really have a choice, you're not really going to feel guilty. You're just going to feel dirty that you're basically made to do this or stop playing the game. That's his key point, and I completely agree with it. I mean, it brings to light the games that haven't done it that terribly. BioShock's probably the best example that everyone's played. In it, it gives you this sort of this so-called choice where you can kill a child or not kill a child, which
Yeah.
seems like a great choice to be given. But again, like games aren't really very good at doing this. He does mention Vampire the Bloodlines.
Yes. Masquerade.
Vampire the Thing that I can't remember.
The
Colon.
Masquerade.
There we go. He mentions that as a good example of real decisions where you can be sort of
Yeah.
evil in a fun way or you can be good in a fun way. So there you go. So I thought it was an interesting. I think it's just a good lesson, is what I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Vampire is the classic one. But again, there's always this issue with these sort of moral choices in games, in that the sort of you're on like the moral choice tech tree. So you kind of like you're not sort of you're not making a real moral choice, because real moral choices have loads of different unpredictable secondary implications. You're on
Yeah.
like you're just going down like this path, even if there are quite a lot of paths, and that's always really problematic, because I don't think guilt can really exist in that context, because you know that the consequences are being imposed by an external agent and not just by the fragmented nature of the universe. Like, there is a writer there going, well, if they're bad here, then this thing happens. Like, that seems to me is such an artificial, box to be in with my morals.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is that since none of these things actually involve killing real human beings,
Yeah, right,
there's
of
not
course.
guilt. I'm sure
Yeah,
in EVE Online, all those stories about people having real thefts
yeah,
in
yeah.
EVE Online, and a lot of crazy stuff that happens in Korean MMOs with married couples,
Mm,
there's some real guilt there,
yeah.
and that's where the real guilt lies. But yeah, of course, it's incredibly difficult to give someone a choice in a single player game that they're actually going to feel bad about, that
Mm,
isn't massively overwrought. I think Fable 3 and Fable 2 are games that people would say do quite a good a good job of that.
yeah,
They have a
yeah.
lot of binary choices. But again, it's binary choices, and as we need to get away from giving you plus points to valor and sort of plus points to evality, like
Mm.
that's not great.
I think also games have to do this in a slightly crude way, and I'm certainly guilty of this as well with some of the stuff we did on Frozen Synapse, where you have to kind of, if you want the player to be forced to do something bad, you have to kind of just do that, force them to do something bad, and then kind of take the implications from there. And it was kind of one of the reasons that I decided to kind of play around with that idea in some of the missions that we had, was to just see, like, what does that do narratively? Like, do you have sort of, are there places to go after you force the player to do that are interesting, or is it just this total dead end? Like, we've seen it in so many games now, it's kind of become a cliche.
Yeah.
And I was sort of slightly trying to mock it at the same time as doing it, but it is really, really difficult to have those big emotional impacts on the player without using kind of overly broad strokes. And Vampire certainly is one of the games that does that better, because you have much smaller situations in Vampire that don't really impact on the main plot. And I think that
Yeah.
tends to be emotionally a lot more evocative when you don't really feel like it's this gigantic sort of huge change to the entire system. It makes you identify with characters a little bit more, I think, because it's slightly more realistic.
Yeah, definitely. I'd agree with that. I think it's a tricky subject.
Another tricky subject that we need to bring up now is Peter Molyneux's Cube
Uh-oh.
game, Curiosity. Now, for those of you who haven't heard about this, basically it's going to be a touch game with a giant, beautiful cube that you can tap. And as you tap the cube, eventually layers come off it and you delve deeper into the cube. And at the heart of the cube is a secret. And the secret can only be revealed by the taps of many, many, many people. So you're joining up with this large number of people all tapping away with different things happening until you reach the heart. And at the heart of the cube is a secret that only one person can find, and it is a life-changing secret, and that's all that we know about it. Now, this is kind of, because it's Peter Molyneux, who is obviously the creator of such fantastic games as Dungeon Keeper and Theme Park and all of that ancient sort of PC heritage that people absolutely love and adore. People have said alternately that this is genius, this is the new thing, or that it is a bit trivial and a bit like a kind of fart button, and it's a novelty app that has no basis in reality. Now, personally, I kind of like this. I think, not as much.
Yeah, I mean, I really I do appreciate it for all of its novelty goodness. I think he's done it well, but I kind of take a real consumer, sort of a game fan point of view in this, and I kind of remember him making Magic Carpet, one of my favorite games of all time, Populous, all these great, just amazing games, Dungeon Keeper, and now it's kind of a little bit of this is a massive gimmick.
Yeah.
This is just him like with his balls out. Like, it's fine, but it's I think it's not worthy of much respect. Like, I think it's just he's got a startup, he wants to do something easy. This is easy.
I'm not sure this is easy. I'm not sure that that's kind of the right thing to say about it. I mean, I think it's gimmicky. Like, I definitely think it's a novelty idea that's quite sort of facile in some ways. Like, it's not sort of like the most profound thing that's ever existed. But I do think it's fun, and it's definitely something that has got people talking. Like, a lot of people have talked to me about this game. And I think I quite like it as a move because it is Peter Molyneux. I think that he knows that he can lend his name and his new endeavour to this and make it popular. So the first thing, if someone was making this who I didn't know, I would say, oh, there's no chance of this being popular enough to be meaningful, right? Because it relies on a lot of input. But because it's somebody high profile who's putting money into it, it actually could be this thing that like you see people who don't really play games doing this thing, and you kind of know about it because it came from the games industry. And I think like of all of the dumb sort of mainstreamification ideas, this one might catch on in some way.
Yeah, although I mean, I kind of agree with one of your points there, and sort of think that the other kind of. So what I'm saying is, because of Peter Molyneux, I think it will be more popular than a standard gimmick thing. I think a lot of people in the games industry will make an awful lot of jokes about it, about what's in the box, Peter, and will play it indeed. But I do kind of also think that the mainstream audience, and I mean mainstream by, you know, people who play Angry Birds and nothing else, and who haven't heard of Peter Molyneux, I do wonder actually whether the idea itself is sort of compelling enough. Like, I don't know if people have this belief that what's inside the box really could be that important. You know, maybe they do, and I guess that's the whole key. You know, if it reaches that sort of crossover success, then obviously I think I have sort of more respect for it, I suppose.
Yeah, it really depends on the mythology of like what is inside this thing. You know, that has to be really built up, and he's done a good job of building it up so far. I mean, I think there's also this issue that you can buy DLC, which I believe allows you to go through many layers of the box quickly, and I think there's like a $50,000 one, and that choice is sort of a bit interesting because it's sort of that to me seems like it's undermining the central tenet of the thing, which is that it's eroded. But I like this as an art project sort of more than a
yeah, that's the problem. I think it kind of is sort of ultimately undermined by it becoming a exercise in monetization. You know, everyone's trying exercises in monetization. The thing that really worries me is, so everyone listening to this has heard this, the most expensive thing you can buy is this $50,000 diamond pick, and the implication is that there is only one of these, and if you buy this thing, you will actually break the cube instantly and find out what's inside it. And I look at it and say, is that good profitability for them? Like, is $50,000 going to pay Peter Molyneux and his 22 cohorts' salaries for very long? Like, I'm kind of intrigued it's that amount.
It should be like $500,000, right? Like it should
be.
Right,
really?
Yeah. Because that
like
would
50,000 just doesn't seem to get anything done at all. I mean,
yeah, because it doesn't. That really also undermines the value. It says the value of what's in here is 50,000.
Exactly.
Like, if it's that, so it's definitely to open the thing. Like you can pay.
It's only been implied, and I read a very long article, an interview with him in Edge, and it's clear that he is also not clear when they're going to open the box, and that undermines it for me as well. It's not something which is defined when the thing starts being released. They're going to look at how people are playing it, and they haven't decided yet how it's going to be opened. So, but I do think that the person who spends $50,000 on this thing probably should open the thing.
They should be the one.
I think they should
well,
be the
in
one.
that case, that does sort of. I mean, if it was that to definitely open it, then I think that's kind of a bit problematic. But yeah, I mean, and also it not having a defined target. Like people in these big crowd movements, people like the target. Like that's the motivating thing, because you need to see how close you are. Like you feel like you're making a difference. If I tell my 20 friends, that's making a difference. Like so, I think they need. I think they need a defined target.
Peter Molyneux looks at the data and says, "Oh, this is getting opened too quickly. We're going to change the value of a click." Like, I'm pretty dubious. I just have to say, like, you know, if someone else had done it, if one of my mates had done it, like if Stu had done it, I'd be like, "Oh, that's cool, Stu. Yeah, we'll go for that."
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Peter Molyneux, I want Magic Carpet 3 already. Maybe that's what's in the box.
Maybe it is. Talking of threes, Penny Arcade Adventures 3. This is a game that you have played and I have not yet played because I am lazy and bad.
You haven't done your homework.
I haven't done my homework, unfortunately. So this is taking the Rain-Slick Precipice of Darkness, and it's taking it sort of out of the kind of RPG-ish mechanics that they had, and it's transplanting it into a Cthulhu Save the World style pixely JRPG format. Do you approve of this? Has this resonated with you?
Yeah, I bought it. It was sort of $5. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
It's sort of super lo-fi, really, really kind of basic, but actually it's got some really, really nice mechanics in there. I believe it's actually by the company who made Cthulhu Saves the World. Yeah. I'm fairly certain of that. And I think it was just a case of like Gabe and Tycho trying to work out how much involvement they wanted on a game. Like I think they've said publicly that they found it quite daunting what it was like making the first two games full 3D adventures on Xbox and PlayStation as well as on the PC. Just really harrowing experiences for them because obviously making games is really, really, really difficult. And I really respect Taiko for being able to find this way of making this game that has
Yeah,
all his writing in it, has all the lore in it, and it didn't kill him to make it.
yeah.
And it's the humor's great, the music's great, it's got a great look. I actually just a huge fan. I mean, it does underline to me that even though I really, really like it, like JRPGs are a little bit too involved for me. I don't really have enough hours to put
Yeah.
into it. If it was on the Vita, I think it would have a better chance with me. But I really liked it.
This is just awesome because what I really like about Penny Arcade is that they're willing to try stuff. So they tried these first two games and it didn't necessarily kind of go exactly the way they wanted, and they were pretty public and clear about that. And they still believed in the idea, you know, that they should be making games of some kind. They should be involved with it. They should be using their, you know, their lore and their characters in an interesting way. And if they found a mechanism, like as you say, but which allows them to do that in a kind of non overwrought way, then that's awesome. Rather than
Yeah,
just
it's
sort of
great.
giving up on the idea.
Yeah, I mean, everything in life is about sort of if you're going to make something creative, it's about finding a way that you can make it without killing yourself, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
So maybe they sort of weren't able to spend 2 years making a video game. Of course not. They actually have a job, you know. So I just respect it hugely
Yeah.
that he found the level at which he could do it and enjoy it.
Fantastic. I think I will check that out. I'll report back next
You
week.
should.
Right, that's the end of the main body of the show as we slide into the dank canal of the after party, where it's basically a free for all. We just talk about what we want to talk about, and
Anything.
we wouldn't do this if people didn't encourage us to do so. So it's actually your fault. And the thing we're going to talk about
Yes.
a little bit is tennis, because we just had the Wimbledon's men's final, and I think Andy Murray and Roger Federer, of course, I think it was fairly kind of predictable. In fact, somebody who is not a million miles away from here predicted it bang on. So what did you think of the final? Did it meet your expectations?
Um, so yeah, I'm a big tennis fan. As people at Res know, because I chose to play
Yes.
to watch the tennis in a pub rather than watching the Far Cry 3 man touch breasts for 2 hours.
Yep.
I thought it was really good. I actually think Murray played extremely well.
Yeah.
I think that he had this increased everyone's opinions of him almost without a doubt. Like he clearly had a couple of physical problems towards the end. Actually, he likes to sort of pretend he does sometimes. He obviously did, and he was in contention to break Federer right to the end. You know, he never rolled over. I've seen Federer beat an awful lot of people and make them look bad and embarrassing.
Yeah.
And he did not make Andy Murray look embarrassing.
That's right.
It's made me think he's better than I did yesterday. And Federer's just great. So there you go.
I'm a Murray naysayer, and although this
Yes, you are.
absolutely did not convert me from my position, I certainly had a lot of respect for the way he played today, and I think that he really stuck in the game mentally. He didn't seem to leave the game like so many other not so good players do. He didn't give up. And it was just a tremendously difficult struggle for him. I was kind of, as soon as he won the first set, I was really concerned that he'd peaked in the match. And it just didn't seem like he was going to have the stamina to kind of push that through into the second. And yeah, it was always going to be a really, really difficult proposition for him. And certainly kind of, he's somebody that seems to try to be emotionless, but is really bad at that, which is one of the reasons I don't like him so much. Like, he has chosen the route of like shutting everything out. He's not chosen the McEnroe route of like using his emotions,
Letting everything out.
yeah. So it didn't seem like that was entirely successful, and it never seems to have been entirely successful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a bit of a Murray fan. Nadal's my favorite player, but I think Murray's definitely my second favorite player. I think in 3 years he will get to world number one.
Really?
Yeah, I really do. I think basically Federer in 3 years will just be too old to be better than him. Definitely,
Right.
I think the same is probably true of Nadal. Although I would say that he's got a chance of still being great in 3 years, and I think that Djokovic, I still think he's possibly like slightly flash in the panny.
Yeah.
So I really think that, and the thing is, Murray is definitely better than everyone else, and I think he's also extremely good. I don't really think that other people who are younger, I haven't seen anyone who's younger who's
sure
going to
not.
come in,
Yeah.
because he's really playing up to their level, I think. So you can book that in the book. In 3
3
years, I
years.
think he will be world number one for at least 1 week.
If he learns how to lob and smash, then that's probably on the cards. But seriously, man, I've never seen such consistently bad lobbing and smashing from one person in a match.
I don't know what to say to you. They
so
were
bad.
really hard lobs. He had to lob off a short drop shot with Federer at the net, which is like really hard.
Yeah, sure.
And in terms of smashes, I think Federer probably smashed worse in the game. Like the number of smashes he had that Nadal, that Murray just got back. Like, you know, he
Yeah.
had some of those points where he had to smash like 3 different times before he got in.
I didn't see much smashing because I kind of missed a bit of the middle of the match. I saw some early
Right.
smashes which were just like, ugh, like horrible, horrible. You should not see from a pro player. And I agree, like a lot of the lobs were difficult, but I didn't see him make a good effort at any of the difficult lobs. Personally, like it just
Paul Taylor thinks Andy Murray is not doing good enough with the lobs.
He was allowing Federer to come in too much. Federer knew he didn't have the weapons to counter it. He didn't have the arsenal. And Federer was like, "There's no cannons on this ridge, man. I'm parking myself on the ridge. Here I
Where's
am.
the bell? I need a bell.
I'm laying
What's
siege
this?
to this town.
I'm ringing the bell.
Siege to the town." That's the end of tennis talk. And now we've got quite a few listener questions, actually, which is amazing, given that we haven't done a podcast for about 2.5 years.
Right.
So I'm going to start off with Avaris Clary, who asked, "Do you guys love us?" And the answer to that question is, it depends what time you're coming home.
I don't know who Avaris Chorus is. I like his name. It's quite rhythmic.
It is.
So, yes, I love you, Avaris, but not anyone else.
Maneth, hello Maneth, long-term member of the Frozen Synapse community, says, "What's it like being awesome?" and that question is so disgusting that I don't think I'm going to answer it. He says, "A more interesting question might be how you came up with the idea behind FS," which is
Yawn.
which is a question that we've been asked many times. In fact, I even know Ian's answer to this, so
Yes.
we could give it at the same time. I don't know. You should answer
Laser
it.
Squad Nemesis followed by Counter Strike, remixed by, I don't know, Bridge.
Well,
There we go.
As we said, it was you and Tom in 2004 playing a
yes.
lot of LSN in France and deciding.
Yeah,
that-
I was on a holiday after my finals in France at my mate Tom's amazing holiday home that his grandparents had, and we were just drinking beer and playing Laser Squad Nemesis while watching pro poker on the television. And I really enjoyed it, but I thought it went on for too long. So I was like, hey, I want to make a game like this that doesn't go on for so long.
Good. We have a blatant troll question from Simon Roth. Hi, Simon. We're not going to answer that, but thank you. Andrew Smith, another blatant troll question. Who is the best at spilling drinks? And that would be me when I spilled an entire pint of cider all over the floor in Above Audio After Res because it was in a plastic cup and I clipped the plastic cup with the edge of my coat and it distributed widely and there was mopping up, which I was very bad at, and people had to help me with because I was so bad. It was tremendously embarrassing.
Really glad I didn't see that. I was talking to Adam Smith.
Yeah, it was not good. And he also says, "What's your favourite non-indie game of the last year?" I'm trying to think of a new game that I bought because I buy games that are like 5 or 6 years old generally. A new game, best new game of last year. Have you got one?
Yeah, I thought I had one before the show started, and now I've completely forgotten what it was.
That's awesome.
Did I buy something 2 weeks ago that was good? I don't know. It's not Diablo 3. Excuse me, 3, whatever it is.
Terrifying. Well, my favourite game that isn't out yet is Retro City Rampage, but that's true of you.
Yes.
So I've got one that isn't out yet.
Either.
And the games I'm playing at the moment... Well, I guess StarCraft 2 was which came out like a year and a bit ago. But that kind of doesn't count. That's not really a game. It's more of a way of life. So I like that. And I'm playing Duke Nukem 3D at the moment. So that
wow.
Not forever. Duke Nukem 3D. So yeah, there you go. Who gives the best high fives? I don't know. I've never knowingly given a high five. So I'm yet to try that out.
We'll have to do that next time.
You don't want to answer that.
I don't.
Andrew Roper says, "Who would win a race between you and Ian Hardingham over the length of Brighton Pier?" Which is referring to something which we can't talk about. So we have to talk specifically about this. Who would win a length between you and me over the length of Brighton Pier? Now, this is quite interesting because you're playing a lot of tennis right now, like almost every day. And I just started running again for the last 2 weeks. I've been running every other day. So I don't know. I think we're
I
kind of
think over a
interesting
long
position.
distance you might win. I think over that distance I think I might win. That's just my
Yeah,
my call.
we should do that and film it
Yo, shit.
for episode 62. And finally, the biggest troll question that everyone asks me just to rile me up is, when is Frozen Silence coming out on the iPad? And the answer to that question is, when I know, I will tell you. What we're doing at the moment is we're trying to get it into beta. Lovely Jimmer is working on all the horrible bugs we have. So when we have a bug-free interface for people to try, we will be releasing that to our iOS beta testers, and they will tell me that all of my decisions are terrible, and we'll have to go back and rework the interface. And then when that's done, we'll have a proper beta and release it. But I'm hoping it won't be longer than a few months' time. So there you go. Right. Do you have anything to add, sir?
No, I'd like to thank all of you watching on News Channel 8 for looking at my face and my mattress and Paul's face for the last hour.
Yep.
And that's it.
I hope that this episode will be uploaded and so on without any technical difficulties, and you'll be able to experience it in glorious YouTuber vision and as well as on your pod device. Thank you very much. Please check out visitingthevillage.com. I'm Mode7Games on Twitter. He's Ian Hardingham on Twitter. Do tune in next time for more of this banality. Goodbye.
Bye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.